Hello and welcome to WriterSpeak, a program dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm your host, Mikala Kennan, and I'm happy to introduce to you today Dr. Janine Canan. A fantastic resume. I'm just going to read just a little bit. You've received your medical degree from the New York City School of Medicine, completed your psychiatric residency at Mount Zion and Herrick Hospitals right here in the Bay Area. In tandem with her medical career, she has authored over 20 books, including numerous essays, stories, translations, personal poetry writings, and anthologies. Dr. Canan has traveled extensively. She's held audience with many spiritual illuminaries of today. She is a passionate champion of women's equality. She continues to conduct a private practice here in Sonoma County, specializing in a holistic blend of psychiatry and integrative medicine, all toward the achievement of a complete level of wellness. Dr. Canan, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Mikala. Happy to be here.
Good, good. Tell me a little bit about the power of the written word for you. You're a prolific writer, along with your normal career of science and medicine, but I'm sensing a seductiveness to that page that you just follow ferociously.
It's true. I really love language. Mm-hmm. It's a very sacred thing for me. I've always been writing. I remember writing down some of my thoughts at night before I'd go to sleep when I was a little girl in elementary school. I think it certainly began with my mother. She sang lullabies to us when we were little, my sisters and me. And she sang beautiful songs, and she told us stories. And that was a regular event at night throughout the early years. Mm-hmm. And my mother also loved language. She loved story, she loved poetry, she loved music, and she loved the arts. So she instilled a love for those things in us through her presence and her voice. And she was a singer, and so she did have a beautiful voice. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. But language comes to the child through the mother. That's how we receive it from the mother. It's the ear is the first sense that really develops. And the mother's voice into the ear, there's nothing more important than that for conveying love and reassurance and presence and
mm-hmm.
all the things.
And they can pick that up.
Oh.
The fetus can.
Oh, even in the uterus, absolutely. Yeah. The sounds and all the vibrations and everything a mother eats and everything mm-hmm. that goes on is mm-hmm. affecting. But once the baby is there, that's the beginning of language. Mm-hmm.
Your first book was published in 1977 and entitled Of Your Seed. It was a book of poems. Mm-hmm. And it was also, you were a recipient from the National Endowment for the Arts.
Yes, it was a publication grant to OES Press, a wonderful Berkeley press in those days in the 60s and 70s, publishing Robert Duncan and Denise Levertov and the Swedish poet Trond Strömmer, who later received the Nobel Prize. And I was very fortunate to have my first book published mm-hmm. by Robert at OES. It was a small book, a collection of mostly poems that I wrote while I was in the first year of medical school, either reflecting on experiences just prior to medical school during the pre-med years in Berkeley, or some of those really stunning experiences that a young medical student has. Mm-hmm. With cadavers or other students and patients. Uh-huh. Yeah, the training that I did was at Bellevue Hospital in New York City, wow. at New York University School mm-hmm. of Medicine, and also University Hospital. So we really saw the medicine that's given to those who are very poor and those who are well off. Mm-hmm. And it was actually an excellent education in medicine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you've written a total of 7 books with an eighth book of poetry about to be released. Are some of your poetry books here?
Yes, this is the last book of poems to come out of my own poetry. Not my most recent book, but of my own poetry. It came out about 2000, Changing Woman. Mm-hmm. Those are poems written actually over a rather large span of time, from mostly in the 90s. But I have a new book that's just out. I'm sorry it isn't here now, but it's mm-hmm. just, it's being published in India by Pilgrim's Press, a wonderful press there, and the book hasn't arrived, with new work, very recent work from the last couple of years.
And that's number 8, and that's entitled Ardor, A-R-D-O-R.
Right, Ardor, Poems of
Life. Poems of Life. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Well, let's hold off on that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I am curious about this juxtaposition of the literary with the hardwired training of science. And your careers have kind of been in tandem. You know, not only were you...
They've totally been in tandem. In fact, they both came to me consciously around the age of 13 or 14. I developed a desire to become a psychiatrist. I'm still not absolutely sure why. But in those days, you used to see rather idealized pictures of psychiatrists in movies.
Sure.
And Cary Grant and so forth. And
always handsome.
Yes. And we had some books, psychology books in the house, and somehow I managed to become very interested in that. But I also really fell in love with poetry at the same time, mm-hmm. and started studying American literature at that age with just great gusto, and T.S. Eliot was my first poet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I must have written a paper on the love song of Prufrock. How does that go? Alfred Prufrock. Yeah.
Well, much of your writing centers around the feminine, goddess spirituality, and women's issues, women's mm-hmm. concerns. Mm-hmm. Did you always have an interest in that part of it?
Yes, well, not consciously, but I grew up in a family that there was a wonderful atmosphere of the feminine in the family. And first of all, I had 2 sisters. My mother was a very feminine woman, and my father was a rather feminine man too, which is quite unusual in this culture, but not in lots of other cultures. Mm-hmm. And and there was a love of art and culture, so that when I left home to go to college, and it took a while to unfold for me to realize what a domination of masculinity there was mm-hmm. in the culture. Mm-hmm. And this has even become more and more exacerbated in time. So that actually was a bit of a shock for me to realize that men actually thought they ought to own the world, or that they actually did own the world and behaved accordingly.
Yeah.
So, of course, as I became aware of that, I was automatically a feminist, mm-hmm. and have been ever since.
I ran into something similar with that, because I grew up in a house where my dad was very domestic, and it was nothing out of the unusual to have him cooking or cleaning yes. or washing clothes. And as I got out on my own, it was a surprise that not all men did that.
That's very similar. So, yeah, my father could provide food too. He was a restaurant owner, and he would bring food home, and he was very nurturing. When he came home, he'd check and make sure that we were all comfortably in our beds and had the right amount of circulation coming through the window. And,
very good.
And he was a tender person, very kind.
Very good. That's a nice role model for a male.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So talk about your interest in Eastern spirituality, Eastern religions.
Yes, well, interestingly, I was always on a spiritual path. I was raised as a Presbyterian in Los Angeles. Then all the neighborhood kids were Catholic, and I was fascinated by everything having to do with their lives. My school friends were Jewish. I also had other friends who were Japanese or African American who brought another cultural influence to bear during my growing up. Mm-hmm. So that background was rich, and furthermore, the great yogi Yogananda had moved to Los Angeles, and he was developing the Self-Realization Fellowship in North Los Angeles during my childhood. And that atmosphere also was prevalent. You could feel it. He had come over from North India, bringing that ancient culture with him. And I remember a high school friend giving me a book of yoga, very intricate group yoga postures, which I actually tried to practice with kids in the neighborhood. Thank goodness nobody got hurt.
And how old were you at this
Los Angeles
time?
was so diverse even then, and it was, you know, a very unusual city.
Sure, sure. And one of the books that I've got is Goddesses and Goddesses.
Yes.
And you've also brought some poems with you. Anything that you can read right now that's kind of in line with some of the feminine sacred, or?
Yes. I brought a couple of poems from the new book. I could read a couple of poems. This first one really expresses my love of life itself, which I see as God or the goddess. Camellia. Lovely camellia, all year you've been waiting to blossom. Summer, fall, and winter you waited, buds locked tight for spring. Now look at you, each round petal blushing pink, veined with coral streams that flow to the delta from some unseen source. In your heart, midst teeny ruffles, dozens of crumpled stamen lift their golden spoons of pollen to the birds and humming bees. No one has ever looked like you before, or ever will again. Your beauty comes straight from her holiness, the Queen of Life.
Very nice. When one lives a life that is infused by the feminine sacred, how is it different from the way we have kind of conventionally grown up, and particularly in our Western culture?
I've meditated more on the sacred feminine than I have on the problems of being imprisoned in the patriarchal mode. I haven't personally experienced that to a really damaging degree like a lot of people have, coming out of various patriarchal religions where they receive very beautiful teachings, but also were very oppressed. So, you know, to be able to step outside of that, of course, is very freeing for a woman and for a man as well. The feminine, the important thing about the feminine are those qualities of nurturing and caring and honoring life and sensitivity and refinement, the wisdom of life itself, and the oneness and unity of creation and the sacredness of it. Those are qualities that I think of when I hear those words, divine feminine or sacred feminine.
There's much writing today about us returning to that in an evolutionary sense.
There is, yeah. It started up in the 80s, the women's spirituality movement in that sense, and Riane Eisler's work, a book, The Chalice and the Blade, talks about the male-female problem in a very constructive way. And then there have been countless books of women's spirituality. And in 1989, I had gone to a, well, this is an example of when the two worlds of psychiatry and poetry overlap. I had gone to a transpersonal psychology conference in San Francisco in '87, and a perinatal, the psychology of the child actually in the womb. Some people were trying to talk about that. which was very innovative thinking, of course. And there was an exhibit of beautiful goddess, mother goddess art in the foyer, which just riveted my attention because I had never seen anything like that. They were quilts and statues. And my psyche was so stimulated by that imagery in the 80s that I was inspired on the spot to make this anthology, She Rises Like the Sun, Invocations of the Goddess by Contemporary American Women Poets. I could sense this divine female energy emerging, and I wanted to find out exactly which poets were invoking the goddess and how they were doing that, and kind of bring that forward to encourage women to think about the sacredness of themselves. And so this was kind of a wonderful book. It's often been used in women's studies, and it contains poetry by Maya Angelou, Diane de Prima, Judy Grahn, Susan Griffin, Joy Harjo, Carolyn Kaiser, Denise Levertov, Audre Lorde, Marge Piercy, Ntozake Shange, Diane Makovsky, Ann Waldman, and various other people.
Powerful list.
Yes, 29 power women for sure.
Wow.
Most of them still writing, some have passed away. And the ones who are, some of them were younger then, they're now writing in their maturity, and the poetry is much more amazing. And in fact, I'm working on a new anthology with Mara Keller, who's Director of Women's Spirituality at the California Institute for Integral Studies. And it will be 100 visionary women poets from around the world in all time, starting with the first poet, who was a woman, Enheduanna, of Sumerian moon priestess, and a very great poet in her time, which was 2500 BC.
Wow.
That's the earliest poem that we have available to us as human beings. And then coming right up into the present with some poems from contemporary women poets around the world who are really writing visionary, big picture, the big picture of our lives as human beings, our journey, where we've been and where we're going.
Do you think we're swinging back completely the other way, or this time we're going to balance nicely in the middle between the masculine energies and the feminine energies?
I thought a lot about that, and I don't know the answer, but it seems you can't really go backwards. I actually am a real proponent of matriarchy. I just highly revere the work of the world expert on this, on living matriarchies. There are living matriarchies. Of course, they're totally under threat, and they're, they're experiencing a lot of problems, and they're various stages of dying out. But there are a number. There's the Kuna in Panama. There's the Moso in Western China. You still see it in certain Native American tribes and other people and places in the world, Kerala, India, and up in Assam, India, and so forth. And Heide Grüttner Abendroth, she's one of the founding women of mothers of women's studies in Germany, wrote a book called Matriarchal Societies, just out in English now. It took quite a while to get it translated from German to English, which is so illuminating. But fortunately, I was able to see a documentary that Heide made in 1998 of Moso people, interviewing them, and to actually see with my eyes and hear speaking men and women who really revere the mother, and to find out what that life is like. And it is totally different. It has nothing to do with dominance and power over, and like a bossy woman, or it's nothing
control.
like that. It's egalitarian, it's a sacred society, there's no ownership. The women manage everything having to do with food, the land, the food, the cooking, the preservation, all that. Men might build the houses and do things, or they're messengers from clan to clan. But you do stay, the mother is the center, the matriarch, and you do stay in your matriarchal clan, The beauty, with young women, it's their beauty that's highly revered and highly, highly revered. And then in the middle part of life, it's the mothering quality, the nurturing, and then of course the wisdom of the old woman. And Heide, in this documentary, asks their three sisters, it turns out that the sisters select the matriarch. How did you select? How did you know who to select? And they all giggled and they said, oh, it was so easy. She was the one who was the most caring. Oh. She's always done the most for other people. So it's the caring quality is the thing that's highly revered. And everybody, men and women, everybody wants the most caring person to be in the matriarch because she's going to be doing for everybody.
Sure, sure, that makes sense.
So, you know, that caring quality that women have, it's always been there and it should be the center of life. And it's not about, procreation either. She asked, I just recently learned this, so interesting. She asked the women, well, there were three sisters, well, how many children, would you have? And they can take the lovers that they wish. If they wish to get married, they can. If they want to get divorced, they can. Marriage is not a big deal because you don't need to get married to have a life. You've already got a place to live, you have a family, you have a life. So, but if you wish, you can. And they said, oh, Heide just guessed, she said, would you have 4 children, 5, how many? And they said, oh no, we would never have more than probably 2 at the absolute maximum, probably 2. 3 sisters would have 2 children. And Heide said, well, why is that? And they said, well, because we have so many other things to do. Which they do. They have arts and just the running of, so many other responsibilities and things they wish to do. So they're living always sustainably with the society, having the number of people that fit with Mother Nature and that won't stress the setting. Yeah. And that Mother Nature can naturally and easily provide for. They're not trying to spread their seed over the earth and kind of make a point. And dominate. Yes, and dominate. And we're in this situation now, which some people actually call a human plague, and we're in big trouble, as we all know.
Tell me just briefly about the new book that's coming out, Ardor. It is a collection of poems.
Yes, it is. Well, much to my surprise, I had envisioned entering my 70s and having just one book finally only to work on. I would be working on my collected poems. I would be revising and fine-tuning my legacy. And it never occurred to me that I would become super inspired. And that happened to me. I got hit with a wave of inspiration. I couldn't believe it at my age. About a couple of years back now, that went on for over a year. And those poems, it's a big book of poetry. It's 250 pages about. Wow. And a quarter of it only are older poems that I decided to weave in. So it's really a lot of new poetry, hot off the press from the last couple of years.
Okay. How can we get that when it comes out, Goddesses and Goddesses, these books, a website? You have a website?
Yes, Goddesses of my collected essays. They came out in '07, and I have a collection of short stories, Journeys with Justine. And then this new, well, it's not so new, but around the same time, this book came out. It's a very beautiful retelling of the Navajo myth of Changing Woman, the creation goddess for the Navajo people. And this is a new edition is trilingual. It's in Spanish, English, and Japanese.
Wonderful.
And it's beautifully illustrated by Ernest Posey, who made what he called modern sand paintings using a feather, moving sand on a copier. And they're exquisitely refined. I don't know how he ever did it. He's passed away, but he did live in Mendocino. And he was a beautiful artist.
And are these available through Amazon or the conventional channels?
Yes, they are. All the books are and will be available at Amazon and all the online bookstores. But a really good way, if you can't find what you want there, is always to go to my website. Which is? And it's JanineCanan.com. I'll spell that for you. It's an unusual spelling. JanineCanan.com.
Okay. And with that, we have to just say goodbye for right now. I hope to have you back again. There's much, much more that we could talk about.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
That was the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. And thank you for tuning in to WriterSpeak. We'll see you again next time. And as always, don't forget to read a good book. It does your heart well. Thanks.